care of, and I'm taking care of them. It's almost like aggressive housewifing in a way. I'm getting all the food taken care of. I'm doing everything, but I'm like, you stay in this room. You stay in this room. Molly, you stay over here. You're going to rest. You're going to hang out. You need to recuperate. I don't want to hear it. Just do your thing, regroup. And you stay over here. You do your thing. I'll get you nuggets. I'll get you this. I'll do this thing. I'm going to go out for a couple minutes. Like, I just took control of the situation. And everybody rested into it.
Right, which is so funny that you call it aggressive. I'm like, isn't that just parenting?
It's being assertive.
Right? It's just being assertive. It's just being a father.
But there's an uncertainty to you.
There's an uncertainty to it.
Because you're like, is this okay? Am I allowed to do this?
This is aggressive.
Yeah, like what's going to be the fallout of this? What's going to be the response to this? It's almost like I don't know. There's an unknown there. It feels like I'm not really sure if this is going to be okay, not even just for the moment, but like for my kids' future. They're going to be in therapy talking about me in 30 years.
Making them that nuggets that night.
Making them that nuggets that night aggressively and throwing him in their mouths, right? You know? So
you're having sauce with this one.
Yeah, you're taking ketchup. I'm not giving you anything else. But like, you know, it's like owning those things. It's made life a lot easier for sure.
Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Once again this week, we've invited Christian Rivera to come on and guest co-host with us. Welcome back, Christian.
Hello, and thank you.
Now, just as a catch-up real quickly, on the last episode, we talked a little bit about generational theory, and we expanded some of the concepts that Antonia and I talked about a few weeks ago on the show around generations. We talked about the archetypical energies generations show up on those episodes, and then last week we started dipping our toes into speaking about the generational shadows that we bring as generations. And we talked about boomers and Gen Xers. So if you want to see us beat up on those two generations a little bit, metaphorically speaking, go over there and watch and listen to that episode. This week, though, you as our millennial representative are going to kick us off to talk a little bit about millennials and Gen Z. Mm-hmm. Maybe some of the generational shadow that comes from these two generations and archetypes. So how do we catch people up? You want to catch people up, Antonia, with kind of the archetypes, generations, theories, just a quick broad brush so we can know where we're at in the whole process?
Yeah, well, my strong recommendation is that you go back and listen to the previous podcast.
Of course.
Or you could just read the Wikipedia page on generational theory if you want to get a quick visual. But we're talking about 4 different generational archetypes that, according to this theory, show up over and over and over again as cycles of, effectively responses to time periods in which we're born.
Yeah.
And these 4 generational archetypes exist within what's called a saculum, which is an approximately 80-year span with a theme, right? Each saculum is like an era or an age that has a theme to it. And it's split into 4 different seasons, starting with spring, then summer, then autumn, and then winter. And depending upon what time period you're born in and the experiences you had when you were young, coming of age, you have certain qualities and characteristics that are common to other people who are born in the same time period in your generation. Now, that doesn't mean... And it's always surprising to me when we make these podcasts and people say things like, you're just generalizing. And it's like, yeah, that's what that is.
That's what we're doing.
That's what culture is. It's a generalization, right, of a whole bunch of people who kind of see things in a similar way. So we're grossly overgeneralizing, absolutely. We're also going to talk about people who are, who represent millions of people as a monolith.
Yeah.
But the point isn't to diagnose how a person is and their identity. It's more like you might have some characteristics that are common to people who experience the same things at the same time that you did. Kind of makes sense, right? That's what a culture is.
Yeah.
So last week we talked about baby boomers who were born, and I wrote it down finally. So because last week we're like, what is the age range?
And this is according to Strauss and Howe's model of generation.
Right. That's right.
Specifically.
Yes. Neil Howe and
William Strauss.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. And the baby boomers who occupy the prophet archetype, in this cycle, were born between 1943 and 1960. And Gen X, which is the generation that we're a part of, Joel, is 1961 to 1981.
Archetypically nomads.
That's right. And baby boomers are archetypically prophets. Prophet, by the way, which means like a prophetic person, not profit as in money, because every time I see it being transcribed on any social media channel, it says profit,
Are you serious?
Profit, as if it's like profits. And I was like, that's not accurate.
Whoops.
Yeah, whoops. So no, it's like as in prophetic.
Yeah.
And we were a little hard on both of those generations last week because we're talking about shadows, meaning that whenever you have an identity or a way of seeing yourself, there's going to be elements about that identity that you really don't want to look at, but they're still influencing you. So last week when we talked about baby boomers, let me let you have the recap because you're the interesting person who's come up with these concepts.
Well, thanks for calling me interesting. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
So you were starting to basically get into this idea that if we are bringing forth a persona, there are things that we need to repress to make that persona an active presentation of who we are. So we're kind of operating based on that principle and bringing that to the collective generational thinking. And in a sense, because of that, we're tapping into areas that are going to be uncomfortable. And I welcome you to bring a defensive frame, not a defensive frame, but an open frame for when you're listening to this, because you will probably feel something uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Very likely. And it's like looking in the mirror and passing by the mirror, getting a quick glance and being freaked out by it and not choosing to look at it. But we're welcoming you to take a moment to look at it. So with the baby boomers and the prophet generation / prophet generation, we suggested that they bring an authoritarian persona to the table. And by contrast, they bring a socialism or social focus repressed into the shadow. Now that previous podcast has details on that. And then the Gen X / nomad has more of a meritocracy, earn your way to the top sort of ethos in the persona. But the sort of collective version of that, more of a communism or community focus, has been what's repressed. And in that podcast, we talked about how to embrace those shadows and start to bring some elements of those into the light to not continue operating as normal, because we're in a time period that is not normal. There is shifts happening. There are big changes happening from an old world of extroverted thinking, effectiveness kind of place, moving into more of an extroverted feeling, harmony world. And that involves a lot of movement into the next territories.
Yeah. I do want to make a note as we move into millennials and Gen Z that baby boomers and Gen Xers, the archetypal energies that they represent or that they're most aligned with, which are the prophets and the nomads. You mentioned last week they're kind of more individualistic.
Yes.
They're more sort of me oriented. And so it makes sense that in the shadow is a desire for community or outward, like more about others.
Right.
And we're going to talk about millennials and Gen Zs being the reverse.
The inverse, yeah.
And what's so fascinating about that is whenever we talk about baby boomers and it ends up being like a short clip on social media, because we slice these up and put them on social media. Oh my gosh, the dogpiling on baby boomers. It's kind of gross, actually.
It's intense.
Yeah, it's disturbing to me that younger people are so, they have so much heat.
And disrespect
to this older generation. And so I think part of what's probably going to surface is what's going on there. What's in the shadow of these younger generations that brings so much heat to older generations that they just assume are deserved.
Yeah. We also mentioned, just to anchor this into, this idea of enabling. So, we talked about last week on baby boomers and the prophets. They want to have a prophetic word, to bring something forward, to articulate something, to cast an idea or an ideal into the world, and then have people accept it, honor it, defer to their wisdom. And what we talked about is their generational shadow. If they do not incorporate the generational shadow, it actually robs them of the ability for that. And then you get the disrespect and the disregard you're seeing today. So this isn't just like a thought exercise of generational shadows. This is like real world consequences or results. If we don't integrate this as a generation, these energies, there's a real spill off that comes from it. And then Gen X, you talked about last week, the idea of relevance. If we don't weave in more of our collective communist shadow as Gen Xers, this really spoke to me. Well, the thing I fear, which we talked about on like the midlife podcast a couple of weeks ago, this notion of, oh, I'm on the cusp of my own irrelevancy. And if we as a generation, as Gen Xers, don't embrace some of our collective shadow, we are going to be irrelevant. That's the part we have to bring into the light and to incorporate into our existence.
Well, I think the thing when we talked about what we're undermining if we don't bring in the shadow, even more so with Gen X, because I think Gen X is kind of used to being irrelevant.
Yeah.
I think it's competence. We talked about how Xers they're very prone to grumbling about how incompetent everybody is around them. And I think what we even more undermine is that because we see this and we're cynical and we kind of keep to ourselves and we go, well, that's everybody else is being stupid. Our unwillingness to mentor and to reach out and have that more sort of communal, the desire that lives in the shadow, and our unwillingness to play nice with others and our harshness, it means that we're fomenting even more incompetence, right? Like we're enabling an even more incompetent environment because we're not doing our job as now officially an older generation, mentoring younger generations into ways of seeing things that would increase everybody's competence. And so I think I'm it's so funny because as a Gen Xer, I'm like, and being competent's the best. Are we talking too good about Xers? And I'm like, not everybody else thinks of competence in the same way that we do. It's like, not everybody else is like, why is competence that big of a deal? But I think for us, it's a really big deal. And our sort of our attitude, right? And our little bit of that slacker ethos that comes from when we were younger, which is a bit of it's like a laziness towards responsibility, is making it so that we're allowing the world to become more of the thing that we disdain. And so I would say that's the biggest way that we undermine.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, essentially.
So paint us a picture of what kind of millennial are you? Seriously, here, Christian. I'm joking. Millennials get a lot of crap, man. So many articles, how many industries they've destroyed, how much crap comes at you as your generation.
Well, that's
you're
the other
problems.
and that's the other interesting part is that the shadow, what we repress, other people can see. It's the part of myself that I can't see, but others see it. So it comes out in this judgment about the generations, the slacker, and this idea that to myself, I'm competent, I'm capable. But as a millennial, we get the same, we get the kind of entitled sort of frame. We get all of the negative judgments of the vision casting that our parents, typically baby boomers, have done for us, and we're trying to carry out some of those wishes, not doing it so well because the systems are different and it's not working in our favor. But we have this desire to fulfill almost the shadow of the baby boomer generation, which means that as a millennial, we put forth a more social focus or socialism. And that typically means tamping ourselves down, making ourselves less than, and often being non-committal, often bringing this frame of we're all equal, or everyone deserves a little piece of the pie, and we have to make sure that everyone's taken care of, and no single person can stand out. If anything, having a single person stand out is dangerous. And I talked about the impetus for this entire idea was me personally experiencing a couple of people in my personal life that came in and they asserted their entitlement and their authority and their vision and what they wanted. And it made me feel like these people are dangerous. They're trying to manipulate everyone. They're trying to forge everyone into their specific direction. But that's kind of the underbelly of millennials. We want everything to go the way that we want, but we're not owning it. And I believe that because of this, you can already notice a pattern that I think boomers and millennials are very much shadows of each other. And there's a lot of triggering that happens there. We blame boomers a lot for our circumstance, right? We were trying to go the visionary path of what boomers were casting for us, go to college, get a good job, do the things that you're supposed to do. But almost at every turn, it was a situation in which it didn't pan out. Yeah. We were very good at following the orders, but the orders didn't lead us anywhere.
So can you clarify something for me here? Because I get it. I get your parents' generation.
Yep.
Boomers have a prophetic word and they say this, and we talked about last episode on boomers almost want you to come into the system that they know to be able to do the work.
Yep.
And they say to millennial children, come into this system, operate this system. You're going to have all the great results. And millennials went, great, awesome. So they went to school, they got good grades, they went to college, they studied hard, they did whatever they needed to do to enter this world that Boomer said was in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I hear from a lot of millennials in their 20s and 30s is they get there and they go, wait, this isn't the world I was promised.
Mm-hmm.
This is radically different system than you suggested it was. Us Xers are like, yeah, no, duh. You can never trust the system, we say to ourselves.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we look at millennials and go, yeah, welcome to the real world.
Right.
And we're like, that'll teach them, right? Millennials will, a year or two of that, they'll get their heads on straight and they're going to realize you can't trust the system. It's not the same world that our parents grew up in the 1960s and 70s. So game over. Like they're just going to mature. They're going to realize that. And then life's going to go on in a great way. And yet I'm looking around from my perspective as a Gen Xer, looking at millennials going, they're not getting the memo. They keep doubling down on a system that's broken and not working. And they complain about it because they know it's not working. And yet they keep doing the same. What's that definition of insanity? Keep doing the same thing, expecting different results. And I would classify as bitching about it. And I'm like, what? Gen Xers, I guess we bitched about it too, but we also got to work and started hacking it together and making what we wanted. So
we bitch about it and abandon it.
Yeah. So explain to me what's going on there. Why is the realization like, oh, the system isn't working, I'm going to keep doubling down on something that's broken? What is the ethos of just keep banging your head against a wall? Do you have a sense of that?
It feels dangerous to trust our own inner authority. It feels dangerous to trust our choice to say this isn't working, so we need to go do something else on an individual level. Whereas there might be a lot of complaining and trying to champion a new way and a new system, but it's still kind of an outsourcing of championing somebody else doing it.
So if somebody tells your generation there's systemic problems, now you're going to listen. You're going to be more interested.
Yeah.
Because you're focused on systemic things anyway.
Generally speaking, yeah.
So in a general way, somebody says, oh, there's these systemic challenges, which there are literal systemic challenges. That's why I don't trust the system because of the systemic challenges.
We're towards the end of a saculum.
Yeah.
It's a transition. A lot of things are not the way that they used to be. And so it's really interesting to think about this parallel between the millennial path and the boomer path, where the boomer was born in spring and then in summer they get to reap all the benefits. We're born in an abundance time period of harvest in the fall, but then we go into winter and no one really knows winter is coming necessarily.
Yeah.
Like there's no preparation for that. So we become young adults and suddenly we're like, where is everything? Like we were promised a bunch of stuff. So there is there's this underbelly of entitlement or of authority of like, I deserve what's coming because it worked out when I was a kid. I got everything I wanted when I was really little, but now I move on to the next stage of my life and now I have to work for everything. Like it's kind of a weird miscommunication, I should say. It's a misexpectation. And it's a challenge. I know it's difficult to understand from a Gen X perspective because there's a consistency in a way, but there's an inconsistency with the millennial narrative that is making it hard to adjust with the programming that we received.
Do you feel betrayed, deceived, or do you feel punished? I mean, in general, what do you think most millennials are experiencing?
I think there's a deception.
They feel tricked.
Yeah, they feel tricked. And I think
misled.
with the deception, I mean, the word victim, one of the definitions is deception. And I think a lot of millennials lean into the victim narrative. Like, I didn't get what I was promised, so I deserve, to get what I wanted anyway without having to do the same kind of work. Now, it's tricky to talk about this because it's got to be very triggering to my fellow millennial brethren. I'm not saying millennials don't work hard, because we work very hard, but we work in very specific ways that rely on external systems. We work very much on existing platforms and apps and interconnecting things really well. It's not the same kind of Gen X cobble things together to make it work, but it's more like band community together to try to make things happen because we all have a little bit of something that can make something work. When really, if we were able to tap into more of the inner authority and being able to go take opportunity to speak what we personally want into the world, almost own a part of the visionary aspect, then we could really start to make a bigger change, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a couple different things coming up for me. The first one, and maybe tag this for just a moment, but the first one is I'd like to talk about how their archetypal energy as a hero generation fits into all of this.
Yeah.
But before that, the thing that's coming up for me, and this is why I like generational theory, even though I mean, I'm always surprised by how much pushback it gets because it's like, it's just a model. It's okay. Nobody's telling you you're anything. All right.
Yeah.
Calm down.
Yeah.
But it's in some ways a real opportunity for healing, because like I mentioned, I get disturbed at how much pushback there is against the baby boom generation, in part because I was taught when I was young to respect my elders, and so that's like probably more of like an artist or a silent generation Gen X relationship, I suspect.
Yeah.
But part of this is that baby boomers like spoke things out, believing that the world would always be the way that it was in their coming of age and in their young adulthood. And that's just called humaning. Like we always assume that our experience is going to continue. We don't know that we're necessarily part of some larger cycle that is unpredictable or is predictable, but you have to be able to see the pattern first. And so the quote unquote promises that were made, like you mentioned, were made at a different time period.
Right.
And so they didn't work out for a generation that was born in a completely different context, because now the system had changed. The initial conditions were different. And so the emergent of the system is going to be very different. So I think boomers set up their children with really good intention. Like they wanted good things for their children, and they assumed good things would continue on. And so the betrayal, the feeling of deception, is certainly not intentional, but it wasn't even done in ignorance and like ignoring information and doing it anyway. It was more made in like complete naivety, right? It was just, that was their experience. So why would they think life would be any different than what they had personally experienced?
Right. Yeah. And so it's like, I noticed in the 90s in particular, as my generation was starting to go through elementary school and middle school, there was a doubling down as the system itself was starting to be less vital.
Right. Unraveling.
It was starting to, they were like pushing kids through. It was like no child left behind, right?
Yeah.
That idea of go faster, faster, faster. Now, a lot of millennials are reporting a lot of relationship to ADHD and a lot of attention deficit and learning challenges, because there's a lot of relationship to academia within our generation as well. And strictly trying to listen for orders. We're so used to, again, listening for direction from our parents. And then that transferred to academia, and it's trying to transfer to the workplace. But as Gen X is starting to get older and they're taking over in the workplace, they're not giving specific orders like we talked about. They're saying, we want this done, and basically assuming go figure it out. But millennials are like, what do you mean? What do I have to do? Tell me what to do.
Right.
Yeah. It feels like millennials, again, from my perspective, how I'm looking at it, are a very performative generation. It's almost like I don't really want to. I mean, this is how I perceive it. I'm sure that there's more nuance here, and I may not have it all right. But how I perceive millennials is that tell me what the answers are, because we already know what all the answers are. Prophet generation, parent archetype generation. You know the answers. You told me you know them all. So give me the answers and let me go perform them out in public or in society or in the culture or in the system. I'll go perform it out. I'll be your mouthpiece. I'll be your your child that gets on the stage for the recital and performs this out in a way. I mean, there's a broad brush archetypical energy that I see.
In this, I remember working in the school system in like 2002, 2003. I was quite young, but I remember working with kids between 2nd and 5th grade and asking another person, what do you think what do you think this generation of kids is going to be like after the concept of teach to the test? What's that going to look like? If we're just teaching them the answers already, right? How's that going to manifest? And I think some of what you're talking about, the performance, when you teach to the test, at that point, it's all theater, right? You gave them the answers. They went and did the test, which is a performance. They did that in order to get funding, right? It was all theater in order to make the system work the way that they need to make it work in order for them to continue to quote unquote learn, right? And so I think what you're talking about is from a very young age being imbued with this idea of theater, right? We perform out taking the test. We already know all the answers because we got taught to the test.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's is that kind of what you're talking about?
And the trope, I don't know if this is true. This is the trope. This is the funny thing that everybody says is everybody got a trophy for participating. The idea of that speaks to what I'm saying. Whether or not everybody on a sports team, no matter what they did, got a real trophy or not is beside the point. You're claiming you did. So
yeah, we did.
It's performative again. It's go out and perform the role, do the performance process. It doesn't matter the result, doesn't matter your competency. I mean, again, I'm overgeneralizing from my perspective.
Right.
It's okay because the whole point is just go through the motions and perform it out collectively with your peers.
And it's like fulfilling or playing out an act that I didn't write. I didn't write this play. I didn't cast this vision for myself. I'm following it. And you would ask yourself, as you have, like, why would you do that? Well, it doesn't make sense to do that. Why would you just not have sovereignty? Why would you not just like be an individual and navigate life? But the reason we take on persona is because there is something deemed unsafe that we put into the shadow.
Yeah.
And there's something we bring forward in order, like when we're kids, we're the most vulnerable ever. Like we're totally hyper dependent on whoever's around us. And so we have to perform the way that we're expected to perform.
Yeah.
And in the millennial sense, it was fitting into the group. Everyone gets a trophy, get good grades. You're going to go to college, you're going to get a job, you're going to do this, and just keep on going down the line. And the modern version of it is some sort of social action or some sort of social involvement, whether that's, fighting for more of the left side feminine minorities or the right side masculine young men who are being underserved. It doesn't matter which political side. It's just more of like kind of a social focus.
Yeah.
And by consequence, a denial of inner authority.
So then the shadow, in the previous episode, we talked about how both baby boomers and Gen Xers are more individualistic and their shadow is more social, right? Socialism or communism, effectively.
Yep.
And with millennials, it's like you mentioned, it's a yin yang. It's more the persona is social. So then the shadow is more individualistic.
Yeah, more authority, needing to own authority and more authoritarian. You can kind of see it come out when really there's this something that I would say that when the social part is threatened, meaning when someone sees past a millennial's social ethos and being like, you're just doing it for yourself, or you're some sort of trigger of either someone standing out and trying to be an authority themselves or pointing out the social sort of faux persona, it brings out this anger that I've witnessed in a millennial. Like it brings out this just like, no, you have to do this and you have to blah, 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 blah. It's like that kind of energy. You have to, It's a very like that kind of gruff. I don't have a specific example, but it's very much like, and I've noticed it in myself. Like if I'm not actively aware of my inner authority, it's going to just leak out in other ways. And I'm going to just spew that kind of acid everywhere.
Have you struggled with that, by the way, in your personal life? Like this whole thing you're talking about, have you seen the shadow part of being a millennial actually affect you and you've had to overcome it or weave it in or incorporate it?
Yeah. I mean, right now I've been really working on, funny enough, before we started this podcast, there was like a moment where you were like, how are we going to start this thing? And I was just like kind of waiting for you guys to tell me what to do. I noticed it. I sat, I was like, okay, I'm going to be a good little millennial, right? I'm just going to sit here and wait. And I was like, no, I came up with this idea. This is my thing. I need to step up. I need to say what I'm going to do. Right. So there's this like instinctual desire to recede. And I have to notice also this internal other desire to step up and slowly starting to peek out and be like, I'm an adult now. This is not dangerous for me to speak up. And the challenge, I think, for millennials is making sure that we're not being tamped down by our peers now. But for myself, I'm trying to now start a business for myself. I mean, I'm an executive creative director. I work with you guys. I help with the podcast art and the video and all of these elements. And I'm doing consulting for other places and I'm trying to expand. But if I'm going to expand, I can't do it myself. And I need to be able to start to be able to give people orders for what things I need to do and get the vision in motion. A lot of it for me is it's authority, but it's also vision. It's also the ability for me to allow myself to cast a vision. Because when I was figuring myself out relative to my parents, a lot of the millennial narrative is blaming our parents for things. As you were mentioned, the disrespect for boomers. It's a lot of blaming for our trajectory when really it's just not owning that we can cast our own trajectory. We can start to do that. So that's one of the impetuses for getting into generational theory, is looking at all of the nodes that led up to my existence, all of the nodes that led my parents to be the prophet generation that they are, and why, someone like my dad would make a lot of comments to me saying like, oh, you're going to pay for my bills one day. You're going to do X, Y, and Z. You're going to do this. In retrospect, it's just all of the casting. And it's not because they're doing anything malicious. It's because that's just how he knew how to operate. And that's how he got what he needed. Mm-hmm. So if I can separate myself from that narrative and start to step into my own authority and realize in little ways how I can do that by sort of correcting my language. I literally just used the word sort of, right? But there is a lot of non-committal language that I notice within myself. And I'm starting to own those the changes in that, and owning that, I have things to offer the world personally.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you work with us because you're super competent. And as extras, we need that. We're like, Christian's competent. He's the right guy. I was thinking about this idea of you called it an authoritarian shadow, right?
Yeah.
And we know shadow content because we get triggered, and the trigger is the mirror back to us that there's something in the shadow.
Yep.
Right. Which is what we discussed last week. And this idea of, maybe you can help me sort of get clarity on this, but I remember Joel made a tweet one time. I thought it was pretty innocuous, and I thought it was actually extremely accurate. But he said, children spell love Time. And parents spell love Obey. And obey is a very authoritarian word. And I can't tell you how triggering it was to people. Like, it was upsetting to them that Joel used the word obey.
Well, young people, particularly.
Younger, like people in the millennial age bracket. Yeah, older people don't care. But in the younger age bracket to millennials and people who are parents themselves, that was really disturbing. And my thought was, well, don't you want you've got toddlers, don't you want them to obey? I say, don't go in the street, don't you want them to listen? Like isn't obedience a necessary component for small children so that they don't say die, right? And but just the word obey was so triggering, and that came up for me when you were talking about this authoritarian shadow. I'm assuming that shadow got prodded a little bit.
Yeah, it feels intense, and even hearing it, I'm like, oh, that's a visceral word. I don't feel as triggered by it, but it's like there's an intensity to it, and it's weird because it feels like I wouldn't necessarily tie a strictness to my parents' visions, but it's a strictness of going through the vision itself. Maybe my parents were not necessarily mean to me in a strict authoritarian sense, but it's like authority in the direction in a way. And I've noticed this other, like, millennials as parents is interesting. I saw an article recently about millennials being kind of egalitarian with their kids. They're allowing their kids to make decisions in the family, how to spend money, how to make decisions in what they want to do in their room, right? And letting them be a part of the family. Maybe that's a part of like the crisis time period and giving them something. But at the same time, it's this desire to not want to be the authority, the lording over the family, like this, old school dad that comes home from work and it's like, everybody be quiet. Your dad loves you. He just doesn't want to see or hear from you. Like it's that kind of idea. And so there's an aspect of that is just like, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be just like commanding everyone. But I've had, speaking of examples, I had definitely some time periods where it came in handy, where I've got my stepkids at home and my wife's having a bad day. And I'm like, I know how to control this situation. I know how to get the kids to make sure that they're fed and taken care of. And I'm taking care of them. It's almost like aggressive housewifing in a way. I'm like, I'm getting all the food taken care of. I'm doing everything, but I'm like, you stay in this room. You stay in this room. Molly, you stay over here. You're going to rest. You're going to hang out. You need to recuperate. I don't want to hear it. Just do your thing, regroup. And you stay over here. You do your thing. I'll get you nuggets. I'll get you this. I'll do this thing. I'm going to go out for a couple minutes. Like, I just took control of the situation. and everybody rested into it.
Right, which is so funny that you call it aggressive. I'm like, isn't that just parenting?
It's being assertive.
Right? It's just being assertive. It's just being a father.
But there's an uncertainty to you.
There's an uncertainty to
because
it.
you're like, is this okay? Am I allowed to do
This
this?
is aggressive.
Yeah, like what's going to be the fallout of this? What's going to be the response to this? It's almost like I don't know. There's an unknown there. It feels like I'm not really sure if this is going to be okay. Not even just for the moment, but like for my kids' future. They're going to be in therapy talking about me in 30 years.
Making them that nuggets that night.
Making them that nuggets that night aggressively and throwing them in their mouths, right? You know? So
You're having sauce with this one.
yeah, you're taking ketchup. I'm not giving you anything else. But like, you know, it's like owning those things. It's made life a lot easier for sure.
So I have to ask, I mean, what's our theory here on this? Because you're saying that the word obey, you even just hear this word like obey. Oh, it makes you feel. and I think there is a little bit of a resistance to the idea of authority and authoritarianism and all that.
Yeah.
And yet, again, from my Gen X perspective, I can't tell you how many times I look around and a government official or somebody in charge of something or a business owner says jump. And it looks like all the millennials go, how high? Let's do it. We'll jump even before you ask us.
Yeah.
We'll wear whatever garment you tell us to wear. We'll go wherever you tell us to go. We'll put any flag in our profile that you tell us to put. Like, we're going to get on board. You tell us what to do, and we will obey implicitly.
Right. And because of that repression of authority, there's almost a desire to find an authority.
Yeah.
It's like, I want someone to replace my father figure or my mother figure. It's like, I want a Stacey Abrams to step up or a Jordan Peterson to step up. It's like, you know, regardless of the political identity, it's like,
Sure.
you want to find some person to tell me how to live my life. So and that's what's interesting about this time period. And it's a little, sometimes, I mean, speaking to the authoritarian shadow, it feels a little scary. This idea that there's so many people who are in the millennial ecosystem willing to submit themselves to what's the word? Sacrifice in order to enable one person's vision that they fully believe in.
Yeah.
Versus taking their own sovereignty to say like, oh no, wait, there's nuances here. We need to make personal decisions.
Okay. So I don't know where you're going next here, but I just want to add in the idea of enabling and things that come up from the shadow not being incorporated. And I think, so we talked about, you know, what did you say for Gen X? It was competency being transferred, leadership competency.
We're undermining a more competent world.
Yeah, we're undermining a competency. So maybe instead of enabling, we're undermining competency. The boomers are undermining their own wisdom and the values they could bring forward. And I would say that, I don't know if it's undermining, but it's a sub-dom relationship that's formed in the world. We have a lot of subs putting up one dom that they fully believe in, like you just said. And so this weird, like, have and have not sub-dom relationship is emerging with the affectation of no, we're all equal and we're all socially the same. And yet I'm going, that's not how it's actually bearing out.
What's interesting is you as a 6, you probably have some relationship with this idea of
Enneagram 6.
Enneagram 6, yes. As deferring your authority means that someone else is going to take in the authority spot. And so it's up to you to take your own authority. And that's part of the growth path for an Enneagram 6.
100%.
It's like the same kind of idea. It's this self-fulfilling prophecy that by not taking our inner individual authority, we're deferring it to someone else. And we're going to have the same, if not definitely absolutely worse at scale, relationship with one person or a few people dominating cultures and guiding the direction of everybody else. And we saw that 80 years ago. And that can get into really scary territory.
So the thing that's being undermined is the ability for all of us to come together and actually work towards something.
Yeah. To be heroes. To
be heroes, right? Which is the thing I want to loop it back around. I do want to talk about Gen Z before we complete. There probably won't be as much content on Gen Z because they're still kids.
Yeah.
And the relationship.
They're my kids. I got a lot of content on these guys.
Yeah, right. Well, I was also going to say.
Pains in my butt.
And by the way, I do appreciate, Joel, that you're bringing up such great content because you're willing to represent how people kind of like other generations feel about millennials.
Sure.
And so, and you're taking the position of the person who feels these ways. I know you personally, and I know that you don't actually have any heat towards millennials, but I know that the questions or the things you're putting by Christian kind of help get into some of the nuances of it. And I appreciate that you're willing to do that, because I know somebody's going to be like, Joel hates millennials, and that is not the case. That said, that tweet of yours that talked about obey, right? There was a very authoritarian tone that got sent back to Joel, which is you're not allowed to say that effectively.
Yep.
Obey us. You're allowed to say
Obey
that.
me
Yep.
in knowing that you're not allowed. Like we've talked about this. Who gave you the authority to just say something that the collective doesn't like?
Right.
And so it's like a smuggle of authority, right? But it's did you pass this by everybody else? Is everybody else on board with it? Is everybody else okay?
It's a moment of authority in defense of the social.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what is being undermined with that is that, well, first of all, the social will never completely get on board. You have to have leadership in order for any group of people to move forward with anything. There has to be leadership, which is why there's always a looking for that leadership. But I also think that what gets undermined is self-authority, because there's a hyper-vigilance against anybody else showing self-authority. So there's that need to own, to bring the shadow authority piece into awareness, to own your own authority. What if you get to say whatever you want to?
Right.
What if that's also reality?
Yeah. And I had a moment where I was like, yeah, what if I can't say whatever I want? Yeah, Antonia, I can say things. Wow.
Right.
No, but it's like, it is like the word that I had down for millennials was commitment, because there's a lot of non-committal language, and it's a commitment to your voice and what you want to do and what you want to bring out.
Unpack that. Non-committal language.
Non-committal language, sort of, kind of, maybe, I guess. Just like, I don't know. Like, what do you think? Like
The
that
word
kind
like, it's like this, like a lot of like language.
Yeah.
Maybe. Okay.
I mean, I attributed it originally to a lot of California-based programming growing up, that we adopted the word like as a culture. But I think there's some of that aspect of non-committalness in the language. And I see it in the zeitgeist generally. Even non-millennials are using some sort of kind of maybe language at times, but they use it a lot more.
Yeah, I do. I noticed myself doing weasel words, and I've tried to conscientiously remove them, but they're still in there.
They're still in there. And so to speak to like the hero aspect, it's interesting. You think of like, the Power Rangers or the Avengers. It's like, it's always a group. I've been watching a lot of wrestling lately. There are more factions than ever, just groups of wrestlers together, but there's still individual strengths. And you can't, the most successful teams are ones that have individual strengths that show up and are able to, come to the forefront and do things together and actually have an impact on the world. And I think that's part of the self-fulfilling undermining as well, is actually having an impact on the world.
So then there's an opportunity, bringing this personal authority component from the shadow, from millennials, just like boomers. They need to be willing to bring their wisdom to meet them halfway mimetically, find a way to interface with other people's perspectives, visions, paradigms, to bring their wisdom to their grandchildren and their children, right? They need to be the bodhisattva that comes down the mountain and shares their wisdom. Gen Xers need to be mentors. They need to help foster the world that they want to see, as opposed to just grumbling and complaining that everybody else is incompetent. They need to see areas that need amelioration and be willing to be the mentors that help other people understand how to do things with a little bit more refinement. And
not just hard systems that are constructed, but people systems.
Right.
Like helping people become competent.
Right.
And those systems to work.
Infusing I think one thing that Xers could do, I'm going back to last week, just as a note, is imbuing an idea of excellence in other people. Because one of the things that I think Xers do well is they figure out how to do something like a little, like really well, right? Like they complete it, they clean as they go, they do all these little touches of excellence, pushing themselves. And I think we could really imbue this idea of excellence into other people. Don't just skip steps, don't just half-ass it, do it well.
Yeah.
And that's what competence is it's doing everything well. What do millennials need to do? What's their big takeaway and insight?
It's being able to cut through the noise of all of the automatic chatter that is happening within your friends and family and what is happening around you. Typically ideological narratives. What are you just making yourself small around, and how can you find your individual path through it? And there's a bravery there. It's like sometimes you might lose people. Sometimes you might lose connections. Sometimes people won't trust you anymore. But you spend 100% of your life with yourself. And that's an important relationship to foster. If you've spent most of your life ignoring that relationship, like that's a lot of wasted time.
So we have a lot of millennials in our ecosystem and audience. I think we pretty much we have like one person on our team that's a Gen X like us. Everybody else is millennial, I think, which is great. I mean, I don't hate millennials at all. I love millennials. They're great. I work with them.
I don't hate millennials.
I don't hate millennials.
Some of my best friends are millennials.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I guess I'm speaking to what you said a little earlier. I don't know why I went off that tangent. Side note, over there, back to the main thing. We have a lot of millennials in our audience, and they come to our workshops, our mentorships, our programs, our events, and they'll come into the microphone or they'll come up and talk to us, and we'll work with them one-on-one or in a group. And I can't tell you how many millennials, especially in the last year or two, since lockdown started and the pandemic and all of that, say, do I have to change the world? Am I allowed to just be a mom, or can I just be a school teacher, or can I just work this job in my town and just affect the people close to me? And it seems like there's something there too for millennials. There's a wisdom in maybe what has to happen. I'm positing this. I don't know. What has to happen is the idealism that I'm going to be the hero that will save the world has to be let go of. And then when I let go of that as a millennial, I can step into the hero that will save my world, the world that I actually can affect and have influence around. But that requires me to step into my own authority, which will possibly remove my ability to have that idealism in front of me anymore, because maybe my social group at large will punish me for it. They won't allow me to assert individual authority. So I'll have to play a smaller game to be able to bring that authority forward. And so that's the trade-off. To be able to step into my authority, I have to bring it smaller. I can't have the big pie in the sky vision anymore for myself and all the credit I'm going to get when I fix it all out here. And yet I'm going to actually have some change. I'm going to actually make an effect in the people around me and the systems that I actually operate in.
Right. Well, because it won't be a performance.
Yeah.
Right. It'll be real.
Authentic.
It'll be authentic and real, which I think I feel the world right now is just starving for authenticity. The real thing, not just somebody being authentic. And I think we have started defining that as being vulnerable and willing to talk about your problems. That is a brand of authenticity, but another brand of authenticity is something that's actually happening in real life. And so as opposed to adulting, it's being an adult. It's not performing it out today, right? And then at the end of the day, like covering your head with covers. It's, no, this is the real deal. Yeah. And there's no Calvary coming again. I am the one who's going to be at the leading my life. And that's honest and authentic.
It's up to me. I got to do it.
Yeah. How old are you?
I'm 37.
And you just said a phrase. I wrote it down. I'm an adult now. And I put quotes around it. I'm like, really? You just had that? I mean, you didn't just have that realization, but in some ways you did.
I honestly feel like I've been an adult in the last year. And that sounds crazy to me in retrospect, even in such short retrospect. But it's that idea of adulting. It's like you were playing this role, and you're talking with your friends about it. Like, are we doing it right? Like, what does this look like? What does being an adult look like? Partially because we don't have the systems of before. So we're trying to figure out, what does the new performance look like? We're almost doing a collective, what is this supposed to be? But then at the same time, for me individually, as I started to work through stuff with my dad and my parents and forgiveness and not blaming them and taking personal responsibility, it's like, this is on me. I had a moment a week or so ago where I was sitting in front of my computer and working, and my kids were in the living room, and my wife came home, and I was like, oh, I'm a dad of 3 kids. It's on me. It's on my shoulders. I got to do this. Like, there's more at stake. But it's also at the same time less than the grand illusion vision than what's at stake. Yeah. Like, my world is so much more potent and bigger than the collective world in my eyes. And so from nurturing my kids, from nurturing and supporting my wife, and the people I work with here with you guys, and the people we talk to on the podcast and do the work for, like, that has systems effects. And while it's still very much the programming in me to be the hero and to want to, to do that and perform and to provide some sort of feeling that I'm making some sort of impact, I can do that in a way that doesn't undermine me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it all feels real. It's all real.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you step up into, I'll say this as the Gen X big sister, right? when you step into all of that and you make it happen and you look back and you're like, wow, I actually got through a lot. That's where fulfillment comes. That's where self-confidence comes. And then you're no longer triggered by other people's concepts of authority because there's no fear you're going to hand yourself over to them. There's no need to. Like, you have your own authority.
Right. And I don't have to lean on narratives of deserving, of making up victimhood narratives of like, my parents did this to me, or the school system, or whatever, which there are truths to those things. But I can actually narrow it in and actually focus on my own trajectory and actually, kind of get what I deserve, for lack of a better way to put it.
Or what's been earned.
What's been earned. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, you can actually earn something.
Right.
Right. And that goes back to everybody gets a trophy.
Right.
Right. It's like there's a beauty in earning.
Right.
And if everybody got a trophy, there was a lot of unearned credit, and that feels hollow and you can feel it.
Right.
And when you become an adult and you take your own authority, now you start legitimately earning things, and there's a sense of fulfillment, and there's no fear that you're going to perform for somebody else, because you don't need to, right? You're doing your own thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So my kids are Gen Zs. I have a 16-year-old son, a 14-year-old son time of this recording, and Antonia and I have a 10-year-old daughter together at the time of this recording. All three of them are right in the middle of the Gen Z generation, and it's the archetypal energy of the artist. The last time we saw this was the silent generation, so it was the generation of Bob Dylan and the Beatles and Led Zeppelin and Jack Kerouac and all the singers and writers and creators that were coming online in the 50s and 60s of the last century. This generation here is coming of age now. They're in their teen years, but they're also children. And there's big question marks about how they're going to show up to the world. But we have some generational archetypical energy that we assume, and I'd say it's probably pretty spot on. So the archetype is the artist. A lot of people call Gen Zs the YouTube generation. I mean, my kids go on to YouTube and they can teach themselves, they've taught themselves all sorts of stuff.
Everything. It's insane how much test iterating happens with this younger generation.
They're on TikTok. They're iterating off of other, creators. They're on YouTube. They're watching YouTubers build and create and make things, which is really interesting. So I'm excited about this. This looks like a lot of hope. And now this is a very Gen X viewpoint, right? I'm looking at my kids going, that's right.
Look at you figuring it out.
Right? I have hacker.
So competent.
We have a hacker ethos. We call our company personality hacker, like hacking things together, figuring it out, make it work, be creative, whatever it takes. That's exciting to me. And I can totally see that. So first of all, how does a millennial's viewpoint, again, you're not representing your entire generation. I know that, but what do you think the sense of, because I can tell you how my kids think about millennials.
Yeah.
And I don't think I can say it live on the air without a lot of editing.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I've got stepkids. I've got 10 and 7, and I've got a son that's on the West Coast. He's 5.
Yeah.
And they're young kids. They're playing Roblox. They're obsessed with customizing. They're in this space of, they're kind of connected to each other, but there's also this kind of winner take all sort of mentality. So it's the hardest to pull sort of experiential data from because they're still growing up. But if we follow some of the principles that we've been following so far in terms of boomers and millennials kind of triggering each other, I think Gen X and Gen Z are going to have kind of a similar notion. And I think with Gen Z, we've got more of this almost community or communism forefront. It's not necessarily by choice, just as the individualism for nomads, Gen X, weren't really by choice. It was just because you had to. Yeah. Right. So Gen Z is also community because they have to. They're in a time period of obedience and crisis. Do what I say, stay inside. You don't have to put on a mask, get a vaccine, do all the things, right? Do all the things you're quote unquote supposed to do. Follow this ideology. And you had this joke on the last podcast of or one of the previous podcasts of holding up a sign, you're a 7-year-old and, perpetuating your parents' ideology, right? The kids don't know, but they're doing it and they're performing it to an extreme for their own sense of safety and being taken care of and getting their needs met, right? So every generation doesn't really know what they're missing out on until they conquer or not conquer, but they come across other generations that are experiencing different things and that awaken something. Like in the silent generation, they watched World War II happen. They did not fully participate, but they were mostly watching the war occur. And they were in a very isolated, very overprotected time period. And so the 60s come along and you've got the baby boomers naked in the streets, running around and, free love and all of that stuff. And have really triggered the silent generation or many of them to just feel like, what do you mean you could be so free? And it actually started to awaken some of the freedom of plenty of the silent generation of individual expression and being able to go in that direction. So with that in mind too, it feels like watching these younger kids having this sort of forced community aspect. There's also this competition framework. You can almost call it community as the persona and competition as the shadow, or meritocracy as we refer to for the persona for Gen X. So it's like this perception that like they very much trust each other. There's this, they can't do anything without each other. They love playing video games with each other. It's always this like multiplayer community dynamic, and everyone's watching the same YouTube videos and learning a lot of the similar things. But there's, like you said, they're figuring out things on their own. There's a lot of individualism in there. There's a lot of winner take all sort of mindset in there that's happening as well. And I suspect when they get older, that will start to creep in much more.
Yeah, you used Fortnite's Battle Royale as when we were talking before, as a almost an example. Not that we haven't all done Battle Royales, and even in older generations of gamers, but there's this idea that they're all together, but they're actually trying to carve each other down until they get to the person who's at the top.
Yeah.
And the shadow will probably also have some hierarchical elements in it as well.
Get together and kill each other.
That's right. Get together and kill each other.
Yeah. Winner take all. And then there's also this obsession with customizing, like individuation, not individuation in the Jungian sense, but individualizing. Like, yes. I need the cool hat. I need the skin. I need to, when my kids, I bought them a game, Splatoon. It's very similar to Fortnite, and like a shoot 'em up kind of game. And the first question is like, how do I get a new gun? How do I get the new clothes or skins, or how do I get that? And even then it's like, there's kind of an expectation that I should be able to get this pretty quickly. Like I can start to grind with the intention of getting the things that I want. Right. So it's kind of this question of, if I've spent all of this time being overprotected, there's this underbelly of what's in it for me.
Yeah.
And that kind of creeps in with being able to do that in video games, because you can't do it in life.
Yeah. So my daughter, 10-year-old daughter, Piper, asked me to play Fortnite with her, and I loved it. At first I hated it, but now I love playing this. I don't know why, but I just really love playing Fortnite. We play teams and we often win, so we do great.
They are so funny too. They are angry. Both of them freak out. I will hear them from the basement.
No!
Freaking out that they did. I mean, it's anyway, actually kind of adorable.
But it's hard to get Piper to go play the game.
Right.
She wants to sit in the item shop, and she wants to pick out new emojis, like, or emotion. What are they? Emotes, I think they're called. Yeah. And I could be less interested. Why? What's the point? But it's that expression, the iterative expression, almost like a TikTok video. She loves to see the character dance or perform or express in something, and pick the different skins for her character.
Right.
And she's iterating and iterating and iterating, and that's more attractive to her often than actually going and actually playing the game, the challenge itself.
Right. And I think there's a distinction between how millennials were raised in playing video games. Super Mario Brothers, you start from the left, you work all the way to the right, you go save the princess. There's a goal. And I've noticed a lot of millennials will pick up a game, and they're like, what do I do? What's the goal? What am I supposed to do here? It's like that, looking for an instruction manual kind of thing again. But Gen Z is just like, all right, poke around. Like, how do I get what I want? It's like, how do I get what I want is the initial question. And it's funny to me, again, watching Splatoon, and he's like, my instinct is like, there's a linear progression. Play the game, do the thing, and then you'll get stuff as a consequence of playing the game. But there's this idea of I was watching him trying to do that, and he was really struggling, because I just can tell he's just so distracted by I want to get what I want. I want to figure out the bare minimum of what I need to get the things that I want. And I was sitting on the couch and watching him, and I'm like, this is my nightmare. I'm just like watching him not figure it out. Like the same thing with the Gen X in a way, but it was like not going towards the goal, not doing the thing you needed to do, not making it happen.
I remember my 16-year-old stepson. I don't remember what we were talking about, but we were effectively talking about chores and some other things that had to be done. And he said the phrase, "That would be a waste of my time." And he was like 15. I'm like, what are you talking about? You have infinite time. Like, you have nothing but time. You don't do anything. Like, you just sit around, play video games, and every once in a while have chores in school. So that idea of like, what's in it for me?
Yeah.
That the idea that his time could be wasted, you know,
Right.
by an older person requesting something of him. It's like it was almost a surprising. It was like a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Yeah, of like, this is how this kid sees the world
Right.
in terms of my time.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's really interesting to watch these generations play out in that there are distinct differences, or at least we feel there are. We're all parents. We see that. And just that comparison with video games. I spent most of my time playing video games. Like, it's just a very different perspective.
Yeah.
I play a lot of games that are like completionist, collect all the things, go do the stuff.
Yeah.
And my daughter even asked the question. She gets like points. Like you can see that being applied in the school system now, that there's like points for behavior. There's points for whatever you're doing in school and learning and stuff. And my daughter asked, like, I don't know what these points are for. Can I use them for something?
Right.
Right. And so that's an interesting question. It's like this idea of like,
Yeah.
what's in it for me I think it's a very valid question with what they're contending with. And it's just an interesting finality to these dichotomies that we're experiencing.
Yeah, and I also, as an Xer, look at the younger generation, my kids, and there's a sense of pride in that they're figuring it out for sure. And so, do you think that I guess this is just you won't have an answer necessarily, but I'd love to hear your opinion.
Sure.
If there's going to be as much trigger between two recessive generations as there are in two dominant generations.
I don't think there would be as much.
And for reference, for anybody who's new to generational theory, prophets and heroes right now, baby boomers and millennials, they're considered dominant generations. And Gen Xers, which are nomads, and Gen Z, or the YouTube generation or whatever you want to call them, they're artists, they're recessive generations. And so, as a general rule, recessive generations, they're not smaller necessarily in size, they're just quieter in influence or impact.
Yeah. I think the triggering is going to depend on your exposure over time, because right now we know it's our kids. Like, we know a lot of nuance of what they're experiencing, and we see both sides of it. We see the connective part and the shadow part. But when we're starting to learn Gen Z at large, I even see myself getting a little bit triggered by the learned helplessness at times, like in the collective presentation. Like, we've had at our art studio, we had a couple of interns. We hired one intern, and she would bother our creative director constantly. Just no sense of personal initiative. At least that was the perception, right? And it's this idea of like no initiative unless there's something in it for me, right? And like, what's the most thing, like the least incentivized thing you could do is be an intern. Like, you don't get anything in return, seemingly. Like, you don't literally physically get anything, or dollars or anything like that. You're just showing up, you're learning, you're getting experience. And there was no initiative. But the second that we hired 2 or 3 interns at a time, they were able to work together, and they were kind of working with each other and kind of competing with each other for these intangibles versus, needing more incentive individually. So it's just kind of an interesting difference in incentive if they're collective versus individual. And it's still kind of all those things at play.
So then, a Gen Z is unlikely to be listening to this podcast. Perhaps they are, if you're like around 18-ish. And our definition of Gen Z, or the timeline, follows generational theory, which is different than, I think, like, a lot of people, I think, believe that Gen Z started in the late 90s. Yeah. 97, so they'd be in their early 20s at this point.
Well, there's that article about the first congressperson that was elected as a Gen Z, 25.
And I think 25 is still officially millennial.
It's still young millennial.
Yeah, it's a young millennial, according to generational theory. And so Gen Zs are, I think, at the top about 18 now. Yeah. And so Gen Z, there might be a Gen Z out there listening, who knows? Yeah. But what would be just like we had pieces of advice for each of these generations, might be pieces of advice perhaps for the parents of Gen Zs, or maybe older Gen Zs. Like, how could they contend with their shadow and, maybe not undermine themselves?
Maybe you need a little more clarity around the shadow too, as well, because I was going to posit I've noticed that unlike most generations, Gen Zs do not feel rebellious toward Gen X parents energetically.
Mm-hmm.
They feel more rebellious or like pushing back energetically against their millennial older siblings, archetypically.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a really interesting expression of kind of a resistance. I mean, I've noticed that with my children, at least my two sons, are caustic and hostile toward your generation.
Right.
I mean, like, I'm like, guys, whoa. Like, these are people too. I mean, that's like, I mean, they're really upset. They feel really bullied and told what to do. And they're really pushing back at feeling like they're being controlled and pushed down.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's just specific to them
But
or if that's a generational thing that they, like their peers also feel.
I was going to say, does that sound like them or does that sound like you?
Yeah.
Right. And then it's kind of like, what are they picking up from their parents? Because there's such an overprotected collective generation. They're getting their ideological thinking from their parents. Like that's who they can trust. And that's what makes them feel safe. So that's the community persona, is like, I'm a part of this ideological community, but like, I don't really know what a Democrat is. I don't know what a Republican is, but my mom is, and she says this, and they're not saying that consciously, but they're just performing it because that's what's going to continue to get their needs met.
You got called out. You're like, why does my sons hate you? And you're like, because you hate me, Joel.
Well, we established earlier, I don't hate millennials, remember?
Some of my best friends.
So let me ask you that. So is that what you're positing that, well, I guess I would see this. I'm going to answer my own question because there does seem to be kind of a 50-50. It really depends on who their parents were.
Yeah.
Some Gen Zs, I guess, are very bought into kind of what your millennial eco, but they probably have older millennial parents, just a little younger than me, because I'm a very young Xer. And so what I hear you saying is Gen Z is picking up the affectation of the parental energy around them.
Right.
And so maybe my kids are, well, see, my sons don't spend that much time with me though. They spend more time with their mom. So I don't know if I can totally own this.
Let's offload this.
My two
an
sons.
excellent out.
My two sons.
Hot potato.
My two sons. So I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is I don't know how much I'm contributing to this because they're not always around me. They have a lot of other influence, more influence from another person.
They influence
than
each
myself.
other too, and what media they watch and what they're exposed to, which can be also influenced by what media the parents watch and things like that.
On the positive, Piper's not talking crap about millennials.
No.
Great. Yeah, I love her. She's
Not
the
yet.
best.
Maybe I'll train her well.
Yeah, we're best friends. So I'm working on it too.
Yeah. Okay. So the again, just remind me the shadow of Gen Z, because I guess maybe I missed the memo on what we pin that down to be.
If I could, I feel like the phrasing "what's in it for me" is really what's in the shadow. Ultimately, it's like I'm submitting fully. I mean, I wouldn't say submitting consciously, but like as a child, I have to submit fully to whatever my parents' ideology is, or whatever the narrative is, or whatever political party or whatever it is. That's the community persona. They're just following along, but inside, and what leaks out in video games and usually in the work ethic, the quiet quitting, is like, what's in it for me? And that's kind of, I think, the ethos behind quiet quitting is like, what's in it for me? You know, whereas I think millennials and even Gen X in a lot of ways, like, we just took what we got. We just dealt with it. We dealt with the failing system. And now Gen Z is like, what's in it for me? This system's falling apart. I'm not going to do anything if there's a falling apart system, because like, I'm still a kid. I could still just keep gobbling up what's here. And I'm just going to do what I can to get mine. That's kind of the unconscious, shadow part. So that's what I see.
Okay.
Yeah. So then the advice would be?
Yeah. What are we suggesting here? I mean, they're young though.
Yeah, it's hard.
Well, this is,
but maybe
like
advice
I said,
for us as parents.
That's right. The advice might be for us as parents, and to recognize how children in a crisis instinctively, like the entire zeitgeist is pushing them towards obedience.
Yeah.
So be careful what you're downloading into their pristine little hard drives.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of an awareness that like they're paying attention and like gobbling up everything, right?
Yeah.
That's why, like, I mean, we talk about all of these generations having shadows. Part of integrating the shadow is not denying it further, or it's just integrating and being able to be aware of it, so that if you see your kids exhibiting that, you can talk to them about the downsides of it, or just like not expose them to things that are of the bigger world that's so dizzy and chaotic that they have no way of making their own judgments on, because they're too young to do that. It's like giving them alcohol at 6 years old, which happened to some of us. But, it's like, I think we're getting closer and closer to feeling like social media and news media and all of these things are just like toxic for the brain in terms of its dizziness and the amount of it and the lack of focus it brings, the dizziness that it can bring. And like for a young brain, we already have these, as parents, we have these judgments about screen time in terms of these things that they're figuring out themselves or watching YouTube videos and stuff like that. But we're ignoring that for ourselves. Like we're constantly rampantly absorbing all of these things from news and the media and stuff. And then that transfers into how we parent and they pick that up. And then that identity forms in them because they're hyper focused on you. So it's like, now is the time more than ever to I wouldn't say be the best parent because that's so subjective, but it's like, if you're on an individuation path and you owning your mistakes and being honest and, bringing principles and things that are healthy as best as you can to the table, then they will bring that with them. And then when it's time for them to grow and figure out what is in it for me and actually embrace that, then they'll be willing and able to do that more freely.
So I might be coming from a Gen X viewpoint again in saying this, but the lesson I'm taking from this conversation, if I was going to say, Joel, how could you be better at this? Like, what can you do to grow and learn from this conversation and maybe in a personal way to me, but also in a meta way to maybe somebody listening right now? Mm-hmm. The message I think I'm taking away is, well, if I want my kids, Gen Z, to eventually someday be able to incorporate their shadow, be able to see some of the shadow parts of their archetypical energy that's swirling in their generation, they're going to need to see me do that for myself and my own generational shadow. And they're going to need to see all of us step up. So maybe the learning is, as parents, that if we're doing the work to identify and incorporate some of the shadow material that comes up for us from our generation, our kids are going to see that and go, that's what that energy did around me. That's what my mom did or my dad did. And I think that's really benefited them in their life. So it's modeling I guess that's the message I'm taking away from my own personal life.
Modeling, owning your stuff, owning that you're wrong sometimes, owning that you can change your mind. It's still having authority. It's not relinquishing your authority as a parent, but you don't have to lord over them either necessarily. And finding, there's balance in all areas, and it's tricky to do that. It's a lot to ask of a parent in a busy, crazy, chaotic world. But for the sake of these kids who are asking the question, what's in it for me? And is going to eventually continue to ask the question, what's in it for me? It's asking ourselves, what's in it for them? Why are they suffering through this? Why are they dealing with our turmoil and our chaos? And how can we work through to get them out of it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought this was a really interesting conversation. And I think I feel like it took this idea of the system and really, not just, I don't understand why generational theory gets so much pushback. It's almost like, it's like the one system that people are vaguely familiar with. And so they're familiar enough with it to give it tons of pushback. But it's doing or I feel like these conversations are using the model for what it's supposed to be used for, which is an access point to our psychology, both as individuals and as collectives. And so I really appreciate you sharing some of your insights and the thoughts you've had around this idea of generational shadows and how we might, as groups of people who went through certain experiences all together, learned certain lessons, took certain ideas of how the world works, make assumptive statements, right? That there are things that we also picked up that we might not be as aware of. And if we can create some awareness around it and integrate those elements, right, that need, like for us, me specifically, there's a mentorship opportunity here. And I'm denying my desire to do so, right? I'm denying my desire to make an impact on the world in that way. But if I integrate it, well, now I have that capacity. Right. So I really appreciate you sharing some of the thoughts that have come up for you and the insight around this concept of shadows in generations, because I have taken multiple things away that I'm going to, specific things I'm going to implement.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I've thought a lot about this. It's been important to me in my personal journey It's also kind of taking on some of the hero ethos of like, well, I've thought of stuff, I need to kind of share it with people, and like hopefully it helps people and all of that, but like at least it was entertaining and something to think about, right? Like I approach this, and a generational theory, like you said, it's like there's a lot of objection to it, but I think the approach to it is to look at it as a prompt for self-inquiry, like self-discovery, experimentation almost. And just the only thing I'm asking is to notice, right? That's why we talked about defensive triggers versus open triggers. When something happens, do you get into a defensive trigger? When does that happen? When do you get into a place where you're like, oh, I'm kind of uncomfortable, but I don't feel threatened. So is there possible movement here? And I think figuring out where those capacities are, I think we can all, continue to make better lives for ourselves as a result.
This has been a fantastic episode. Same one with last week. I loved having you on the show because I'm taking away personal growth messages for myself from this conversation. And I just appreciate you being here, Christian, because it definitely speaks to me. Like I have notes. I have things I'm going to go change about my life and I'm going to reflect on. Mm-hmm. And so I want to talk to you listening right now. Where are you at in this process? 2 things I want to focus you on. What awarenesses are coming up? Have you been able to identify some of the shadow material for your generation, the archetypical energies of your generation, maybe some of the positive things that you want, the desires, the idealisms you have in your generation, but have you noticed some of those shadows show up? Maybe stuff you don't really want to see. Oh, it's hard to see, but you're starting to be aware of them, and maybe even ones we didn't cover on this show. You say, hey guys, great what you talked about, but I've also noticed this additional one that's been showing up. Love to have you come over and make your voice heard. Let us know some of the awarenesses that are coming up for you over at personalityhacker.com directly below this episode. Second thing, what actions are you going to take from this conversation? You're the 4th person in this convo. You haven't had a microphone, but I'd love to hear you come over to the website below the show. Just list out some of the actions. True learning equals behavior change. So what are the behaviors? What are the things you're going to start to work on? I mean, for me, I think I'm going to definitely model the look at shadow for my kids. But this idea of mentorship, this idea of transferring competency to the next generation through teaching, through modeling, through mentoring, not just in like an abstract way, but in a real way to show this is how you have competency in this area, taking true leadership. That's my action step. I'm going to step into that. I'm going to make a list of things I can do with our team immediately because I work with millennials, with my kids, like a bunch of people in my life. Oh, wow. There's opportunity for me as a Gen X person to step more into leadership and guidance and mentorship. Where could that be? So we want to hear from you. Again, come over and make those action steps known, some of the awarenesses known at personalityhacker.com.
Yeah, and if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave us a rating and review on iTunes, it helps us out a lot. We also are on YouTube. This is a video podcast. You might be watching it. It will be produced by our lovely Christian, who is also, it's got to be very meta for you.
Yeah.
You're going to be editing this after you've been on it.
Listening to myself is my
crazy.
favorite thing to do.
Awesome. And if that is the case, then you can subscribe, hit the little bell to let you know when our next episode is up. As the kids say, smash that subscribe button. Smash it. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers. And if you leave us a rating review on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot.
Yeah. Thanks to Christian Rivera as our guest co-host. We'll have to have you back.
Yeah, my absolute honor and pleasure.
Yeah. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
My name is Christian Rivera.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.